So welcome everyone to our session. This is What's New in Totara Learn, so hopefully you're in the right classroom at the moment. Today we're going to talk through the new features and the upgrade process when you're looking at Totara Learn releases. I'm Wesley Holden. I'm the community manager here at Totara. Looking through the list, I've spoken to a lot of you when we were setting people up for certifications and things like that, so welcome back. It's great to see you, and I'm glad that folks are interested to see what's going on with our new releases. I just have a couple of housekeeping things I want to talk through before we really start. In terms of housekeeping, this is a recorded session. We'll be posting it publicly after the session, so if you have questions or anything like that, please use the Q&A tool as well as the chat area to ask those questions. We also have Meredith Henson here today from Totara, who's going to be helping me answer questions and keeping an eye on the chat and things like that. So thank you for joining us, Meredith. We are also planning to continue our discussions over on the totara.community site. If you don't already have an account, please go set up a free account. What we want to do is, start engaging through webinar and then let the conversations continue. So let's talk about Totara Learn. The first thing I want to show you is the 4 freedoms. So many of you have already been exposed to the 4 freedoms, but this is sort of a new model and a new way to talk about Totara Learn to help people understand sort of the concepts of open source, the concepts of the partner model, and kind of wrap it all up in one really nice package. So the 4 freedoms are sort of the 4 areas to address when we're talking about Totara. The freedom to innovate, most of you are partners, you know the freedom to innovate. You can get the software, you can expand features and functionality, you can integrate other tools, you come back to us if you potentially have features that you want to add to the system that you think would be useful for the entire community. That innovation is, kind of a feedback loop where we're working with partners and subscribers as well to bring in new information and really keep the software, up to snuff to where it needs to be in order to meet the needs of our subscribers. The freedom to save, that's really the key of open source. It's that ability to focus, it's like you're already going to be paying money for services, so why don't you just focus on paying the money for services rather than having to pay a license fee? So we want people to be able to focus their budgets on the areas that they really need, the development of extra features, the integrations, the support over implementation, those sorts of pieces that honestly they're going to be paying for anyway. Freedom of choice, you're not locked in with Totara. If you decide over time you love Totara, but not necessarily the partner you're working with, or maybe you need to move and get an integration that somebody has, our partner companies work together. You can potentially move to another partner if you need to. We also have a lot of folks who will do things like they'll start out self-hosting. They'll realize that it doesn't make a lot of sense because they could go to a partner company and move their support and all of that to that external company that's able to do the support and maintenance and take a lot of those pieces off their shoulders. So that freedom of choice and being able to move around and really set up the way you need to with the system is a huge piece. And that's just around implementation. Within features and functionality, you choose what you want to use. If there are particular modules that you never want to use in your implementation, that's fine. Turn them off. You never have to see them. If over time you decide that you do want to start rolling out pieces, either for yourself or potentially for your clients, that's great. Those features are still available and can still be rolled out in a phased process. You don't have to sort of turn everything on all at once because that can be pretty overwhelming for folks. And the biggest piece for me, because I'm coming from the learning side within the learning world, is the freedom to learn. Really, our goal is let's just get our students in and let them learn. They shouldn't have to worry about whether the reports are coming out correctly or if their certification is going to renew properly and things like that. Those are pieces that we as administrators need to take care of so that our learners can just get in, do their coursework, and move on with their day. So, and I'm going to be talking about resources all throughout. In the totara.community site, there is the 4 freedoms guide. So there's like a written guide to that that gets a lot more in-depth on the different areas of the freedoms. So definitely check that out as well. So when we're talking about freedoms, this is software. And so one thing that does happen is we have multiple releases that are out in the wild. Anything from, I've seen supported versions from Totara 2 all the way up to Totara 11. And support for versions really comes down to the partner companies and what versions they support for their clients. And most of you are partner companies. There were a few subscribers, so I apologize if some of the language doesn't address everybody, but we're going to kind of switch back and forth a little bit. So this is just a quick look at when different versions were released. So about once a year, we've come out with a major new release. TOTARA 11 came out a little bit early in the year compared to our other releases because we were wanting to get out that GDPR coverage as quickly as possible. So these are the versions that are currently out there. And we have folks that are out on all of these different versions. Anything from TOTARA 2 from their first install because they got it, they liked it, they just want the bug fixes, all the way up to TOTARA 11 because people needed to support GDPR functionality. So I'm going to put up a quick poll, and I want to know what version is your Totara Learn site, or what versions do you support for your clients? So I made it a multiple choice question because I know, and let's go ahead and launch that poll. I just want to see what versions people are supporting right now, because we do have, when people register their sites and register their subscriptions, we do get to see what versions are out there. But I want to see for the folks that are attending today, just what versions are being supported for the most part. So I'll leave that open for just a minute or two. Yeah, I'm very pleased. I'm not seeing any I'm not sures. That's great. It's a pretty good range though. Anything from Totara Learn 2 all the way up to Totara Learn 11. So we'll leave it open for about 30 more seconds just so everybody can get their votes in. And it's always interesting to me to see what versions people are running and why they stayed with a particular version. Oftentimes it's, and especially in government work, I used to work for a university system, and so with the university, oftentimes change was hard. I mean, change management was difficult for them because, not only are they working with a vendor to update their software and get them documentation and all that, but they also have their own internal teams that are working through those same sorts of things. And so updates can be slow. It can be a very slow process and a lot of folks having to go through and do approvals and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and end polling and publish the results just so you guys can see what we're looking at. So Totara Learn 11 by far is definitely the one that's getting the most results. We've also got folks on Totara Learn 10, 9, and 2.x and older. So one of the issues that folks often run into is, well, why would I upgrade? I'm happy with what I've got. Why would I even, why would I want to change? Why would I invite that? And there's a lot of really good reasons, honestly, to invite change. We're putting out a new point release every year. We're putting out regular evergreen releases as well. So when do you decide to make a change? So there's a few reasons to upgrade. Every major point release has great new features. It's really up to you to decide if those are features that you care about or not, or if those are features that your client's going to care about. Every new major point release and the minor releases have security patches and bug fixes, and those are things we definitely want to get to our clients because they can be impacting their use of the software. And in Totara 11, we introduced GDPR functionality. Those are necessary tools for folks that have EU citizens that are their staff, that are their clients, anybody accessing your site, anybody's data that you're potentially holding that's from the EU, that's going to impact you. And if you need more reasons to upgrade, go to the totara.community site, and there is this great support and maintenance document that's been created. So there's a slightly bigger version of it. And you can get to that if you go through the totara.community course. When you first log into the site, it's the first thing you're taken to, so super easy. Then lower right-hand corner, you'll see that support and maintenance document that talks through a little bit more of the reasons why you would upgrade and things like that. Really helpful, and it's really designed to speak to clients. So if you do have someone who's very resistant to change, this can be a sort of softer way to say, hey, here's some ideas from our vendor as to why you would want to do this. So let's take a look at what's come out. That's really the focus for this particular session. So we'll start with Totara 9, and we're just going to work through each version. So just some quick highlights, and then we're going to go through screenshots of each of these. If you have questions as we go, please feel free to put them in the questions area or in the Q&A box. You can also put things in the chat, but it's a little easier to manage questions through the Q&A. So seminar management. So remember, we had the tool called Face-to-Face, and it has been replaced with a seminar management. So it's the same functionality, but super duper beefed up. This is just like a short list of some of the changes that were made in seminar management in Totara Learn 9. There is a webinar out there, and I can provide the link to it, that gets into it. Honestly, it's an hour of content in and of itself. But here are just some of the highlights. Things like having downloadable sign-in sheets, the ability to use Google Maps to have location set up for your sessions, the ability to have manager approval, having rooms that are selectable at date level. I mean, there's just a ton of stuff. The biggest piece that I really want to talk to is the conceptual change that happened here. And I apologize for the fact that it is flashing. Let me pause that real quick. Okay. With the previous versions of face-to-face, you had sort of two levels. You had an event, and you had sessions within the event. So I have a CPR course, and here are the dates it's going to happen. And those could be recurring dates, meaning that every month different people are coming to the same event, or it could be that every month someone comes for 3 days to an event. And what we've done is we've expanded that concept a little bit. So within your Totara Learn courses, so like the e-learning course, you can set up a seminar activity. So you'll notice that face-to-face has been replaced with seminar in the activity dropdown. When you create that seminar, you're going to create individual events. So this might be, if I have a monthly CPR class, this would be the first month, this would be January's, this would be February's, and it would go on from there. Within those events, you then have sessions. So this might be a one-day session where you show up once and you're done. Or sessions could be, if you show up, let's say, like for 4 hours a day, every day for a week. Those would be your individual sessions. Each session can have associated rooms, so the location of the actual session, and assets, so the things you need for it. So I use CPR for this because it's a really sort of like very obvious thing. You go to your Red Cross class to get your CPR training, and the first half of the day, you're in one classroom because it's, and this is literally the CPR training that I went through. You go and you sit down and you get some classroom instruction, and there's literally the teacher standing in front of you and facilitating that conversation. The second half of the day, actually for me, took place in a different room. It had more space. It didn't have desks. Instead, it was sort of like an open floor, and there were the CPR dummies spread out, laying on the floor, so that each person got their dummy, and you could go and you could actually practice your chest compressions and things like that. So for those sessions, you would need different things, potentially different locations or rooms, potentially different assets. In this case, the CPR dummies. And so you have the ability to go through and decide session by session what you need, where it's going to be, also who is going to be training for your events, who's going to actually be facilitating that classroom training. So the other changes that have been made are, I'm going to go through a little bit quicker, and please know that this is a really high-level look. There are tons of changes out there. I'm going to send you the release notes link, as well as links to the what's new documentation and everything, so you'll have the ability to see those pieces. So we've got navigation and theme improvements. So you'll notice that there's a little bit of a different look and feel, and I'm going to show you a couple of different pages just to kind of show you how that new theme looked. So you can see there's sort of like the pop-up tabs for the menu. And in each release, we've put out a new theme. We also have multiple job assignments. So multiple job assignments refers to the ability to, and let me stop this for a second and talk to it while I get my slideshow to behave. With multiple job assignments, you have the ability to say, John, in this case, John Lerner, is has some temporary job assignment. Maybe he's replacing another manager for a little bit, but then he also is a regional sales manager. So somebody has the ability to have multiple jobs in the system. They might work for multiple companies. So if they're a consultant and they actually consult for multiple clients for you, those are all possibilities within sort of the realm of having jobs. And so we wanted to be able to address that within the system. The way that previous versions of Totara handled that was you could kind of sort of have at least 2 job assignments. There was a primary and a secondary, but only the primary actually drove anything like training in the system, drove the reporting you showed up for or showed up in or anything like that. So with multiple job assignments, you're able to associate a different position, organization, potentially appraiser, manager, as well as temporary manager, which is down below but not included in the screenshot, So you can have all of those different associations with a person. So if you have someone like John who needs to be able to report to two different people, show up in the reports, show up maybe on their team dashboard or anything like that, multiple job assignments are going to give you the ability to do that. And we're going to talk about more about multiple job assignments as we go through more content. We've also included MOODLE 3.0 features, so things like drag and drop quiz questions, the ability to upload and modify the dates of file resources, and again, there's a huge list that you'll be able to access. There are some changes in the gradebook to make things a little bit more clear as well. Honestly, one of the biggest one is the option to allow duplicate email addresses. So in previous versions of both Totara and MOODLE, one user, one email address, that was it, because that's where the person's notifications were going through to and things like that. In this case, what you're doing is allowing that same email address to be reused. That's something we often see like in retail, where you may have one user who actually has sort of an account for the system and has like a portal login and maybe an Active Directory email address and all that, but maybe the temporary staff don't actually have that sort of information, or maybe at the retail level, the sales floor folks don't get an email address through the company. But they still need to be able to get notifications and be able to set up an account. So duplicate email addresses allows for that sort of thing to happen. So that's Totara 9. But then we build on that with Totara 10. So things that we see in Totara 10 include the course completion editor. So we have the ability to go in now and actually say, sorry about that. We have the ability to go in and say, okay, here's this person, here's their course completion status. We can actually go and manage on a more granular level the date that they completed it. You can see down below related programs and certifications. You can actually go through and edit and manage the time and date completed or the status as well. You can also dig down into the individual course completion as well as activity completion if you have activities that are completable. Because prior, you sort of had to just rely on the system to always put in that date and hope it was correct. But things would happen, like for example, I was just working with a client who, when somebody goes to complete a course, they go and upload a certificate. But the date that they upload the certificate was not necessarily the date they had actually earned it. And typically it was not the date they had earned it. In some cases, somebody had earned the certificate 10 years before. And so the course completion editor is allowing you to go in and put the real completion date in, essentially. Now, a couple of things to note with that completion editor, and let me pop up my notes just to make sure I don't miss anything, is that it does need to be enabled under advanced features. So in 10, you'll see that under advanced features, and it does allow you to edit not just current course completion dates, but also history. So if you have historical completions of a course being completed over and over again for like a certification, you'll be able to access all of those pieces. There's also a recycle bin. I was so pleased by this addition. The recycle bin allows you to, let me pause that real quick. The recycle bin allows you to go under course administration and see it here. And if you have an instructor who deleted a quiz and actually didn't want to delete that quiz and they want to bring it back, it's allowing you to bring back content that was accidentally or intentionally, but errantly deleted from the system. Again, that's something that you do need to enable at a site-wide level. So it is a course recycle bin, and you can just go and enable that under recycle bin. And then there's some settings around like how long something stays in the recycle bin, if it automatically hides if there's nothing in the bin, which I actually turn off. I don't particularly like it to hide. I want it to be there all the time so I can see it. But here's an example of what that looks like. So here's a couple of, this was just a label from the course page and then a document that I had deleted from the course page, added to the course page and deleted so you could see it. And you'll just see that there's a restore button on those. We've also beefed up the ability to issue badges. So you're now able to, in Totara 10, issue badges based on program completion, because before it was based on just the course completion and profile completion. But now you can do it based on program completion as well as audience membership. So I can say, if someone is a member of a certain audience, issue a badge. Or if they're a certain, in the audience and maybe they've completed a program, or they have completed their profile or completed a course, something like that. All of those options are now available when your badges are being awarded. In Totara Learn 10, we did see some more theme changes. Again, doing more expansion in terms of accessibility and making themes better and easier to modify, because honestly, most sites don't use the Totara Learn theme out of the box. This was the introduction of the basis theme. And so you can see that we've changed the menu styling to make it much more modern. You also get into things like being able to edit the main menu much easier. You don't have to go through the code anymore. Now you're able to do it through the site administration panel. And in the upper right-hand corner, we've also made some modifications to the icons for messages and the way the drop-down menu behaves when you're looking at user information. So just a little bit of like all of the same functionalities there. It's just restructured a little bit. And it makes it easier for the user to get into their messages and their notifications. So the second sort of phase of changing the way job assignments behave in the system was how we get new job assignments in for someone. So prior, when you went to import somebody's data to the system, if you are using HR import, you would import a user data file, and that user data file would include the person's details, but it would also include like their position, their organization, their manager, etc. When we introduced multiple job assignments in Totara 9, we needed to make that a more elegant solution, we'll say, because we needed the ability to then, if I put in multiple job assignments, I didn't have a way to specify, this is job assignment 1, here's the modification I want to make to it. Maybe your title changed, or I want to fill in a start date that I didn't have before, that kind of thing. This gives you the ability to do that. So when you're setting up your HR import in version 10, you need to be able to upload both a user file and a separate job assignments file. And this is just sort of a quick look at what the job assignments file can look like. So you need to have an ID number, so that's the job assignment ID. Every job assignment has a unique identifier. So for each user, I should say. So I can have job assignment 1, 2, and 3 for user 1, job assignment 1, 2, and 3 for user 2, etc. User ID, when it was modified, if it's deleted. These are things that you'll see in the other files as well. But then we care about things like the name of the position, the start date, what organization position it's coming from, and then if there's a manager associated. Another big piece is user tours. User tours is the ability to, when a user hits a certain page in the software, the user tour is this little pop-up box that can come up and you can click through to walk someone through something in the system. So in this case, and actually you'll all have seen it in the Totara community. So when you came to the site for the, one of the first times, you have the ability to have it pop up, and it kind of pops up with text and it points you to certain things, like if you wanted to, in this case, we wanted to point out that you can search the forums, if you have questions. And so this is giving you the ability to do that. You get to customize the language, and you also choose, and it's essentially like a scripted process where you say what it's going to say, what it's going to point to, and then what's going to happen next. So every time the user hits the next button, they might get a new thing that pops up and tells them to go to a different place. And then when they're done, they can click on End Tour. They can actually click on End Tour anytime. If you want, you can always allow them to relaunch their tour. Typically, it only shows up once, but you can allow them to relaunch their tour and walk through it again if they need to. So one of the things we're looking at doing is actually adding them to our demo site so that when a new user comes in, they have the ability to sort of be walked through and pointed out different areas of the site. And it's, it's something you see in a lot of software now, that rather than having to like go and get documentation and figure out how to navigate, it's just like sort of a quick, helpful walkthrough. Another piece with Totara Learn 10 is the featured links block. The featured links block is a block that allows you to curate content within the site and literally feature it in the way that you want to. This is an example of the way we've used featured links within the Totara.community site. So when you go there, if you click under courses, you'll see Totara Learn and certifications. And if you click on either of those, you'll see a dashboard like this. And so what this allows you to do is you go in and you decide what the tiles are going to be. So in this case, our tiles are, we've uploaded 2 images for them, and we've also linked to courses within the system. You can also allow it to link to external URLs if you want to. So if you want to point someone potentially to like help resources or something like that, you can do that. So the way we've done it, and this is pretty slick, it was something our instructional design team came up with, is that if someone is coming in here and they have not completed a course, they just see sort of a couple of different rotating images. There's one sort of with the badge, and then one with sort of a picture from the course. And these are images that kind of go back and forth automatically. And then if a person has actually completed a course, then they see a different version of that panel. So in this case, they see one with a check rather than just the plain one. So in this case, I can see which courses this user account has actually completed. So there's a lot of really cool things you can do with that in order to create more curated catalogs of your system. Another piece that we've added, and so this is a little outside of the realm of learning, and it's more on the appraisals and self-evaluation side. We've added the ability with 360 feedback to have self-evaluation. So when you create a form, you can choose whether the person is required to evaluate themselves, if it's optional, or if they're actually prevented from evaluating themselves. And then when the feedback form has been assigned out, you've asked people to go and complete it, the learner gets the option to evaluate themselves. And so they'll see the same version of the form that anybody else would see to be completed about them. It's a pretty slick option because it does allow you to have that little self-reflection that can be really impactful when it does come to trying to remember how a project went 6 months later or things like that. Again, there's a ton of other things in 10 that could take up an entire hour by itself. So we're going to go ahead and jump to what's new in Totara Learn 11. So 11 is the newest release. This is the one that we've been talking about. I feel like I've been talking about GDPR for a while, so hopefully this is the last time you hear about it for a little bit. Some of the highlights in Totara Learn 11. The first is this is when we introduced the ability to register your Totara sites. So there's a registration form that you'll see when you go under site administration. It's a really handy feature for us because it allows us to see what versions of sites are out there. We're slowly getting a count as people are registering their sites of what version people are on, what sorts of sites are out there. Are there lots of demo sites? Are there lots of production sites? We can see when a site transitions and things like that. So it's a very slick tool that allows us to have more information about sort of what's going on out in the world of Totara. So you'll see this in Totara Learn 11, and you'll actually see it in previous versions of Totara as well. So this is a case where we actually backported a feature to those other systems as well. And I should, just one more point, the data that is sent, there's no personally identifying data or anything like that, no usernames or anything like that are sent. It's very high level data of user counts and site names and things like that. Totara Learn 11 was the epic GDPR release, so we are covering user data, privacy, and protection. One of the places, if you have not heard of GDPR, somehow, you can go to the totara.community page, and down here in the lower right-hand corner, which I believe is just above the area where I talked about before of that support and maintenance document, there is a guide to GDPR compliance. So again, this is a guide that can be for subscribers as well. So if you have a subscriber that you're hey, you really need to upgrade to this version and this is why, if they're not understanding it, or if you are a subscriber and you're I don't know if that actually applies to me, go read this document. It's this is one of the first things I read about GDPR, and it was really helpful for me because I'm not an EU citizen, so it was new information. But it gives you an idea of what GDPR is about, what you actually need to do, and how Totara Learn can help you support GDPR compliance. One piece of GDPR is the ability to have site policies. So a site policy, and you'll have seen this when you created or the last time you went to the totara.community site, a site policy pops up and says, you consent to our use of your data, or here's our privacy policy. Every website out there has, launched one, so you've seen that in the last couple of months. With your Totara Learn site, you have the ability to set up multiple site policies. So when the person comes, what things do they need to agree to? You know, in our case, it was basically like, hey, here's the information that we are going to be, you know, using. Here's how we're going to be using it. Here is our privacy policy about what you need to do if you don't want us to use your data. So in our case, what we set up one that is a privacy policy that you have to agree to, but then we have a separate sort of like marketing policy where you get to decide whether it's okay for us to sort of use, you know, a screenshot from a forum or something like that within, you know, marketing materials or anything like that. So you'll see that you can have multiple site policies. They can be translated into multiple languages. The user can come through, excuse me, not the user, the site administrator comes through and decides what it's going to say, what someone consents to, whether it's required to get into the site or not. And here's what the learner sees. So they go to log in, and this can come up whether the person has a login for the site or if they are a guest. So if they are a guest user, they still potentially need to consent to a site policy. So the user sees the policy and they'll choose yes or no. If they choose no and you have required that the person consents in order to access the site, they're going to get a message that pops up and says, basically, you have to consent or else you're going to be logged out of the site automatically. If the person chooses to consent, then they'll be able to get through and see their data. If consenting to a site policy is not required, then they'll see the language, they can say no, and they can still access the site. So there may be cases where, you know, you decide what language is most important for them to see and what they're allowed to go through and what they need to be prevented from going through until they agree to. You may have multiple versions of a site policy. So over time, the language might change. Like, you know, your attorney comes back and says, hey, actually, you need to add like one more phrase about or one more paragraph about something. We're keeping track of versions of the site policy. So not just what language it's in, but also the versioning of the policies themselves. So if we ever need to come back and say, okay, which version of this policy did John agree to? You can go and see that very easily. So here's an example from a user's perspective. So this is Abby Smith. Abby, you know, is in and just looking at her profile. And what she can do is go under administration and she'll see site policy consents. And as an administrator, you see this for your users. So you can come in and see the policies that were presented, the version, the language, what statement they got, what their response was, and what date that was received. If the person, check and say, I don't think my other screen, oh yeah, there we go. If the person did not consent but later does, all of that is tracked. So you're going to be able to see that sort of progression over time. But that also leads me to say that there is a site policy records report source that's been added to the system. So as a site administrator, if you don't want to have to go through individual users to look for that data, you can just create one report that has all of that data in one place. In my case, actually, I haven't turned really any. I just have one filter turned on, but you can have more filters if you need to for that data. So the ability to present site policies and let someone know what you're going to do with their data is the first piece. Another piece that comes up is that need to allow the person to have control over their data. So do we allow them to export their data from the site, and do we allow them to request a purge of their data from the site? So here's the difference. Exporting data just means we get a copy of it out. The data still lives in the site, but we can go through and create export types as site administrators that allow us to decide what data will be part of that export file. User profile information, course information, program certification information, activity completion, files someone's uploaded to the system, settings and preferences that they've chosen the system, literally anything that the user touches basically in the system, anything they've uploaded, any changes they've made, all of that stuff from a learner perspective is logged as part of this user data export. So you can go through and decide to set up different export types that allow sort of different, it's like windows into different data or filters of different data that the person can bring out. You can set up different versions of the export. So you can choose whether the user is going to be allowed to export their own data or not. There might be versions of the export that are just for administrators. There might be versions that are just for the learners to be able to use for themselves. And I should say staff, because any person with a login for the site is going to potentially have access to do this export. You also decide if file attachments will be included, so uploaded files in forums, assignments that they've uploaded, anything like that. could be potentially included. We also have purge types. So export is about just creating a copy of the data. Purging is about fully removing data from the system. So this is where GDPR gets a little bit more tricky, because we need to keep a person's data safe. We need to be able to remove it from the system if we want to, if the person, and by if we want to, I mean if the person requests it. But we don't want to remove data that's going to impact us negatively around like reporting. So for example, if you need to do compliance reporting, and you need to be able to say, all of these people completed, certain things, certain dates, etc., you need to be able to say that. Now, with the purging, we don't want to take away from our ability to report, but we also want to get the person's data out if we need to. And so the way we can do that is, again, purge types. So a purge type allows you to come in and say, okay, here are the pieces of information that will be removed if we run a purge of this type. Again, user profile information, course information, programs and certifications, and potentially a person and all of their completion data can be completely wiped from the system if you want it to be. But if you don't necessarily want to do that, you can sort of keep some of the reporting data and allow that removal of the user without removing all of that reporting data. So it's one of those things where there's sort of a fine line of doing what the person's asking to keep their data safe, but also making sure that we're not completely losing our ability to report in the ways that we need to. There's a ton of reporting around both exporting and purging as well. So we're able to do things like track, and we can go user by user, or we can have entire reports that show us this. So in this case, here's Abby Smith, and I'm looking at this as a site administrator. If I go to browse list of users, I'll see an additional action option that I can click on. Looks like a stack of pancakes. And I can go in and see if there have been requests to purge, if there have been automatic purging or manual. So literally, do we hit a button to purge data, or you can automatically purge data if someone meets certain criteria, like if their account is suspended or if it's flagged for deletion. You can actually set up purge types that are associated with that. You can't automatically purge based on if a user is active. So if it's an active user, there need to be additional steps because we don't want to like sort of accidentally wipe out data for all of the users on the system. But if you can set it up such that like anybody who is suspended automatically gets purged, and here are the things that that sort of get purged about them. So kind of jumping to another topic area, when you are setting up your certifications within this version of Totara, you're able to set up repeatable seminars. So formerly, when somebody was working through a certification, if you had a course that involved a seminar or previously called face-to-face activity, you would get a warning message if there were no upcoming seminars within the time frame that the person would potentially need them. And that's fine for programs. That's really simple because it's like, here's when the program runs, here's when it's available for the person. For certifications, you need the person to be able to come back and potentially repeat a seminar over and over again. So again, back to that example of CPR, we need to be able to say, you took your CPR certification 3 years ago, now you need to be able to sign up for another one. So keep in mind that within seminars, if you're a user of them, or if you implement them for folks, you know that you can set up seminars so that a person can only sign up once for it. And so there was a conflict there to say, well, you can only sign up for it once. You've taken it. You can't sign up for another one, even though technically you need one 3 years from now. And so what repeatable seminars does is open up that ability. So now the system recognizes, oh, you took this seminar 3 years ago as part of your certification. We're going to make it enrollable again so you can go and sign up for a new session. A final piece, and the screenshot's not particularly great for this, but it kind of gets you to the point. We introduced persistent login. So prior to this, Totara would automatically log someone out after a certain number of hours. I think the maximum was like 4 hours. You'd come to the site and it would automatically log you out. And so what we've introduced is persistent login. So once you log in, you just stay in. Kind of jumping a little bit again. Conditional activity access restrictions. It's a really long name, but it's a really simple idea. When you're looking at your courses, you have individual activities, and the individual activities could be restricted based on what somebody has been doing in the course. If you watch the video, then you're allowed to take the quiz that was on the content that the video showed you. If you receive a certain grade on an assignment, then you're able to go and take the quiz, that kind of thing. So what we've done is we've just expanded and added a couple more conditions to this. So you can say things like, if a person is in a course and they are a member of a certain organization or hold a certain position, let's show them this activity, or maybe not show them this activity. Because maybe you have different versions of something you want to show someone based on who they are and where they're coming from, what language they speak. So maybe I have 2 different versions of a PDF, one in English and one in Spanish. And so based on details that I already know about the user, I can just set it up to say, okay, if the person's language on their profile is set to English, show them this version. If it's set to Spanish, show them this other version. And we can also say based on audience membership. So we can, if somebody has met certain criteria, and they're in that audience, then we can show them a certain version of an activity. Or we can potentially hide or restrict access to something based on things that they've previously done in the system. If they've tested out of something, maybe you have a course where you allow someone to test out. If they've tested out, they become a member of the tested out audience, and you no longer need to show them certain resources or things like that. This gives you the ability to do that. And these are restrictions that can be used mixed in with all of the other restrictions. So you can still do things like say, maybe this is only available for a certain period of time to a certain group of users who speak a certain language. You decide how complex you want to make it. The restriction set here at the bottom is where you can do much more complex restrictions that sort of build together. So keeping in mind, that's at the activity level within courses. It also applies to resources in courses, so things like page labels, pages that are in there, anything like that. So that's a ton of information. So let's talk about some resources, because we are getting kind of close to the end of our hour here. The first resource you're going to want to take a look at, and documentation. If you go to totara.help, and one thing you'll note is that some of our URLs have changed. So we've made that progression from totaralms.com, and we're moving over to Totara Learning for a lot of our URLs. You'll also see things like totara.help. So that's where our documentation lives. There is documentation for every release of the software. So whether you're supporting somebody on 2.2 still, or if you've got someone who's on the cutting edge with Evergreen, you'll be able to get in and get access to documentation specific to that version. So a couple of things here to notice. If you click into a specific version, you're going to be able to get access to the version comparison guide. And this is just a table that goes through and addresses all of the changes that have been made in the different releases of Totara. So if you have a client and you're like, well, they actually need LTI version 2 support, well, you can take a look at this document and say, yep, they need to be on at least version 10 or 11. So you can see, based on the checkboxes, what features each version of the software holds. So you'll be able to see that for all of the releases of Totara. There's also that support and maintenance best practice document that we talked about a little bit before. That's here on the totara.community page. So when you first log into totara.community, you're taken straight to this community course. So down the right-hand side, you'll see lots of resources for things like webinars and links to featured courses. Featured courses are often the new courses that we've created. So keep an eye out on those. We are releasing new courses regularly that are feature-focused, because that was a request we'd had from partners and subscribers for a long time. So you've already seen things like Totara Learn for beginners, you've seen user management, reports, etc. We are now moving into activity and resource-specific courses, so things like courses that are about like seminars and quizzes and things like that, things that were part of the course creator certification. That's what we're on now. So we will have more subscriber-focused content soon for the trainers that need to get into the system and just figure out how to use a quiz real quick, or figure out how to use discussion forums or things like that. That's what we're into now. But this slide is actually showing you release notes. So if you go to totara.community, again, there are tons of discussion forums, and one of them is the Totara Learn release notes. So if you click in here, you have the ability to go and subscribe on the left-hand side and automatically get an email every time we release new versions of Totara. So these are going to show you every minor release as well as the major point releases. And you can just come in, click on one of these links, like when Totara Learn 11 came out, you can come in and see all of the release notes for that particular release. That is all this forum is used for. So we keep our forum separate so that you're not getting barraged with emails. So you can come in and you can choose to subscribe to this forum, and that way you don't have to go and look to see if a new version's been released. You'll always get a notification. We will be following up with additional webinars. We're looking to do them monthly. So there will be a product series, which I'll be hosting for the most part, talking about features and functionality and new releases, just like we did today. And then we've also got Lars Hyland, who is doing a series of best practices. So today he did a session on best practices around blended learning. If you didn't end up attending that, you can also, we'll be posting the videos for that as well as the Q&A that came up. But keep an eye out because we will be posting both of those. And one area you'll want to check is if you go under community on the totara.community site, we have added a webinar section. So you'll be able to see all of the upcoming webinars as well as past webinars. So if you're looking for resources or a video from a past webinar, thank you all for your time and attention. Have a wonderful rest of your day and evening, and we'll talk to you again soon.